Welcome to the debate. What if the picture perfect, frictionless morning routine, the one with the meditation, the perfectly steeped herbal tea, and the quiet journaling, what if that is actually the exact thing setting you up to fail?
Right. Or conversely, what if that seemingly impossible standard is the only lifeline that can pull you out of chronic procrastination?
Exactly. It really is this ultimate tension in behavioral psychology, right? Like, do we aim for a flawless ideal or do we plan for the messy, unpredictable reality of human life?
Yeah, and today we're looking at a piece of source material that sits right at the center of this tension. It's a shadowing exercise from the Academy of English Excellence.
Right. Which, on the surface, it's a language learning tool designed to help non-native speakers build fluency through repetition. The text outlines this incredibly idealized, perfectly executed day of focus, growth, and, well, gratitude.
But beneath the grammar and the vocabulary practice, there is a very distinct, very prescriptive philosophy about how human habits should be structured.
Oh, entirely. It walks the listener through waking up, commuting, working in a state of flow, taking highly structured breaks, and, ending the day with a specific gratitude ritual. And as we unpack this text, I am really reading it through the lens of a student who is actively struggling to maintain any kind of daily consistency.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, when I put myself in the shoes of someone paralyzed by the chaos of their own bad habits, I look at this hyper-specific blueprint and I don't see an impossible standard. I see the exact necessary scaffolding required to build momentum from scratch.
And I come at it from a completely different way. As someone who coaches people on productivity and habit formation, this script sets off massive alarm bells for me.
Really? Alarm bells?
Oh, absolutely. From my viewpoint, the frictionless perfection presented in this material sets a dangerous, inflexible standard. I argue that it fundamentally misunderstands how habits are actually formed in the real world. And ultimately derails long-term consistency by ignoring human fallibility.
Well, let's dive right into that tension, starting with the sheer level of detail the text provides. When you lack consistency, the hardest part of the day isn't doing the work, it's deciding to do the work, right?
Sure, yeah.
The sheer weight of making micro decisions just paralyzes you. In psychology, we call this decision fatigue. Every time you have to choose what to wear, what to eat, or what to do first, your brain consumes a measurable amount of glucose and energy.
Which is exactly why we automate things.
Exactly. But you have to know what to automate. If you're listening to this, you've probably tried to adopt one of those highly scripted routines on January 1st. And the reason this text is so valuable for a struggling student is that it doesn't just offer abstract advice like, have a productive morning.
Right, it gets very granular.
It provides a meticulous physical sequence to eliminate that cognitive load. You fill the kettle. You choose a specific, large, ceramic blue mug. You make lemon and ginger herbal tea. You write exactly 3 goals in a blank notebook with a black pen before you even touch your phone.
It leaves absolutely nothing to chance.
It is a literal script to follow. For someone drowning in a sea of options, this level of strict behavior is a lifeline. By dictating the exact environment and the exact tools, it removes the friction of choice. It provides a directional anchor, so the student can conserve their cognitive energy for the actual difficult task, which is the language learning itself.
I understand the appeal of that structure, but I define this material's approach as a fragile fantasy. As a coach, I have to look at how the text explicitly defines the goal.
What do you mean?
Right in the middle of the commuting section, the text states, and I quote, "Consistent means doing something regularly without stopping." Defining consistency as doing something without stopping is a catastrophic coaching error.
Why catastrophic?
Because true consistency is not about never stopping. It is about your time to recovery. It's about how quickly you bounce back when you are inevitably forced to stop. And this script does not prepare a student for that reality because it relies on an environment that bends perfectly to their will.
Well, it's just setting a scene, isn't it?
It's more than that, though. Think about the morning sequence they describe. The alarm gently wakes the narrator. It doesn't startle them. The floor is the perfect temperature. They step outside and a young woman with a fluffy brown dog just smiles at them.
It paints a very calming picture.
It paints a vacuum. Every single variable perfectly aligns. I mean, when your baseline expectation of a habit requires zero friction from the outside world, you are building a hothouse flower.
A hothouse flower.
Yeah, if your habit requires exactly 72 degrees, perfect humidity, and a smiling stranger to survive, it is going to wither and die the second you plant it outside in the real world. A coach knows you don't build resilience by imagining a world where the train is never delayed.
So you're saying they need to practice for the bad days?
Exactly. You build resilience by learning to navigate the days when the alarm doesn't go off, the train is broken, and you have to do your English practice standing in the freezing rain.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. I don't believe the text is setting a literal expectation that the world will always be perfectly compliant.
Then what is it doing?
Rather, it is isolating the ideal mechanics of a productive day so the student can internalize what good actually feels like. Think about a musician. You wouldn't tell a struggling guitarist to learn their scales while standing in the middle of a loud, chaotic dive bar, just because, well, that's the real world.
No, but you wouldn't tell them they've failed if the room isn't perfectly silent either.
But you have them practice in a pristine environment first to build muscle memory. That is what this script is doing for the struggling student. It is cognitive muscle memory.
Okay, but muscle memory for what, exactly?
When you repeat a habit in the exact same environment, the blue mug, the black pen, the quiet desk, your brain literally insulates those neural pathways with a substance called myelin. Think of it like paving a dirt road.
Right, the neuroscience angle.
Yeah, the more you drive that exact same path under those exact same pristine conditions, the smoother and faster the brain transmits that habit. That's why the text insists on the specific sensory details.
Look, I'm not denying the neuroscience of habit formation. My concern is the psychological framing around it.
But even on a psychological level, the text does acknowledge that friction exists. It just focuses on internal friction rather than a broken train. Look at the section on deep work.
You mean the project report?
Right. When the narrator sits down to write the report, the text doesn't say that focus magically descends from the heavens. It outlines a deliberate, strict protocol to combat the modern world.
It says they put their phone face down.
Yes. It says, I turn off notifications on my phone. I place my phone face down on the desk. Eliminating distractions helps my brain enter a state of flow. That is a highly tactable, realistic response to friction.
Okay, fair enough.
For a struggling student, visualizing that physical action is empowering. It teaches them that focus isn't a personality trait they lack, it is a boundary they can construct.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that this obsession with constructing strict boundaries actually bleeds into areas where rigidity is deeply counterproductive?
Like where?
Well, this illusion of control isn't just external. The text takes the mechanical rigidity of the morning commute and the deep work session and maps it directly onto human energy management and rest.
Ah, you are referring to the midday break sequence.
Exactly. I'm sorry that I just don't buy that this prescriptive approach to renewal is helpful. Let me tell you why. The text treats resting like inserting a coin into a vending machine.
How so?
The narrator goes to the lunchroom. They eat an impeccably healthy lunch of grilled chicken, brown rice, and steamed vegetables. Their coworker, Maria, magically appears with an equally perfect Greek salad.
Right.
They have a pleasant, conflict-free conversation. Then they go outside, sit under an oak tree, observe an elderly man feeding sparrows for exactly 5 minutes, and return with a mind that is completely clear.
It is modeling an ideal break. I mean, what is the harm in showing what a restorative lunch hour looks like?
Because it teaches the student absolutely nothing about how to recover when they inevitably failed to execute that perfect sequence. Human energy regulation isn't an algorithm.
But they need a baseline.
Real flexibility, the kind that sustains long-term consistency, requires listening to your body and adapting. If our struggling student has a highly stressful morning, inhales a sugary pastry instead of brown rice, and spends their break doom-scrolling out of pure exhaustion, this text provides no psychological safety net.
A safety net.
Yeah, it implies that because they failed the script, the entire day is ruined.
Well, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it underestimates the very real danger of unstructured time for someone who is already struggling.
Danger?
Yes, you argue that real flexibility is about listening to your body. Let me be blunt. For a student who lacks consistency, Listening to their body is often a one-way ticket to a 3-hour procrastination spiral on the sofa.
So the solution is to micromanage their rest?
Yes. The text provides strict boundaries around the break because boundaries create safety. Notice that the text specifically highlights the environmental shift. It says, this contrast between the busy city and the quiet park is beautiful. It reminds me to find balance in life.
But the balance is artificially scheduled.
And it has to be at the beginning. When you are building a habit from scratch, you must schedule the relaxation just as strictly as the work.
I just think that's setting them up for failure.
Not at all. By dictating exactly how long the break is and exactly what sensory inputs to focus on, the rustle of leaves, the distant traffic, the text is training the student's brain to maximize recovery in a short window.
Like a scheduled recharge.
Yes, it is teaching them that rest is an active, intentional process, not just collapsing because you are out of energy. For someone prone to burnout, learning to rest on a schedule is a revelation.
I hear your point about the danger of the procrastination spiral, but by scripting the rest so tightly, you turn rest into just another performance metric to be judged against.
I don't see it that way.
But it is. And this brings us to the most concerning part of the entire text for me as a coach, how it defines success at the end of the day.
The evening wind down?
Right. Let's follow the narrative. The day continues flawlessly. The report is submitted, the boss immediately praises it, and the narrator heads home. They cook hot noodle soup with tofu, they reject the television to light a lavender and vanilla candle.
Which sounds lovely, by the way.
Sure, they read fiction and they get into a bed with crisp white sheets to practice gratitude.
Which is a universally recognized, evidence-based psychological intervention to improve well-being.
But look at the conditions attached to that gratitude. The narrator is grateful for 3 things: the morning sky, the successful completion of the report, and the kind conversation with Maria.
Exactly. 3 good things.
The text assumes the day was a resounding success. In fact, it explicitly says, by showing up today, you proved your commitment to excellence.
And they did.
But my question to you is, what framework does this text provide for the student on a Tuesday when everything goes wrong? What happens when the report is rejected, Maria is in a terrible mood, the train is late, and the student skips the shadowing session entirely?
Well, you just try again the next day.
But remember, the text defined consistency as without stopping. If a script defines consistency as never stopping and ties your commitment to excellence to the flawless execution of an idealized day, it is actively building a shame trap.
A shame trap?
Yes. In behavioral coaching, we see this all the time with streaks. If a student is struggling, their biggest hurdle isn't ability, it's the shame associated with breaking a streak. It's an all-or-nothing cognitive distortion.
I get that, but
When they miss one day, the shame causes them to miss a week and then a month. True consistency is waking up, burning the toast, missing the silver train, having a terrible meeting, and still finding the psychological flexibility to do 10 minutes of English practice on a noisy bus instead of in a pristine office. This text makes no room for the noisy bus.
that's an interesting point. Though I would frame the evening gratitude practice entirely differently. I don't see it as conditional on success at all.
Really?
No, I see it as inherently resilient, precisely because of the specific things it chooses to focus on.
You mean the successful report?
No, look at the very first thing the narrator is grateful for, the beautiful morning sky. That is a constant. Whether you get promoted or fired, whether you study for an hour or spend the day in bed, the morning sky was there.
You think that's a deliberate inclusion?
Absolutely. By pairing a simple, undeniable fact of nature alongside professional success, the text is subtly teaching the student to anchor their gratitude to things outside of their own performance.
It feels like a stretch.
The text says, focusing on good things brings peace to the heart. It doesn't say focusing on your flawless execution brings peace. It acts as a psychological reset button. The lavender candle, the minty breath, the crisp sheets. These sensory details are designed to definitively close the loop on the current day, regardless of what happened.
So they can start over.
Exactly. It allows the student to wake up the next morning and attempt the strict schedule again with fresh optimism.
That is an incredibly charitable reading of the text. As a coach, I cannot ignore the literal words used.
The words matter, sure.
The text explicitly tells the listener every single sentence you repeated is a step forward. It binds their sense of progress entirely to their compliance with the exercise. If the only way you feel you are making progress is by ensuring your notifications are off, your tea is perfectly steeped, and your room is silent, you don't really own that habit. The environment owns it.
I see why you think that, but let me push back on the idea that aiming for this aesthetic perfection is a barrier to entry. We have to separate the mechanism of the shadowing exercise from the narrative archetype it employs.
Okay, go on.
The struggling student knows they are not going to magically manifest a cheerful baker with fresh croissants on their street tomorrow morning.
Then why include it?
Because visualizing the ideal sequence, the uninterrupted flow of positive intentional actions, is how you prime your reticular activating system.
Let's unpack that for a second.
Your reticular activating system, or RAS, is essentially the bouncer at the club of your brain. It filters all the incoming data from the world and decides what gets your attention.
Right.
If you are constantly focused on how hard life is, your RAS highlights friction. But by vividly visualizing this deeply intentional, beautiful day, the cool floor in the morning, the warm soapy water in the sink, you train your brain to look for opportunities to be intentional. The text isn't demanding perfection, it is illustrating what deep intentionality looks like.
But when you intertwine that intentionality so tightly with aesthetic perfection, you run the risk of confusing the two. A student might easily believe that if their desk doesn't have a small green succulent plant, they somehow aren't ready to do the deep work.
But sometimes, relying on the environment is exactly how you have to start. You have to let the environment own the habit until you are strong enough to own it yourself.
It's a crutch.
A necessary crutch. For a struggling student, motivation is an unreliable emotion. It comes and goes with the wind. But a routine is a structure. This text provides a structure so robust, so vividly detailed, that a student can just step into it.
Without thinking.
Right. They don't have to feel motivated to write 3 goals. They just open the notebook to a blank page and take out a black pen because that is what the script says to do.
And I maintain that relying on that level of environmental perfection is a vulnerability. Let me summarize where I stand from the perspective of the productivity coach.
Please do.
The text presents a beautiful, calming narrative. But by insisting that consistency means acting without stopping in a flawless, lavender-scented environment, it ignores the messy reality of human life.
Okay.
It teaches a rigid compliance to an aesthetic ideal rather than the gritty, adaptable resilience required to maintain habits when life inevitably goes off script. The time to recovery is what matters, and true consistency is forged in friction, not in the absence of it.
And to summarize from the perspective of the struggling student, while the text absolutely presents an idealized, frictionless day, that is precisely its greatest strength.
How so?
The sheer precision of the routine, from the minty breath to the deep, peaceful sleep, provides an essential, structured compass for those struggling to find their way. When you are lost in the chaos of bad habits and decision fatigue, you do not need a lecture on flexibility. You need a map.
A very detailed map.
Yes, and this material provides a masterclass in how to map out intentionality step by step, hour by hour.
Well, I will concede one major point of convergence here. Regardless of the aesthetic perfection, the text's emphasis on deliberate intentionality is fundamentally sound.
Right. It's about the choices you make.
Exactly. There is a moment in the morning routine where the narrator sits with their tea and explicitly says, "I do not check my phone, I do not look at messages, I look outside instead."
It's a great moment.
It is a powerful, proactive choice. Whether you are in a quiet apartment or a noisy, chaotic house, choosing your first input of the day is a critical skill for focus.
I agree entirely. The internal tension we've explored today, between striving for an ideal, highly structured standard to build momentum and accepting the messy limitations of human flexibility to build resilience, is one that every learner has to navigate for themselves.
Indeed. It's the balance between the map and the terrain.
Precisely. We invite you to return to the source material and listen to this shadowing session again. As you visualize that perfect day, ask yourself, does drawing a flawless blueprint of your morning inspire you to build a stronger foundation? Or does it just make you terrified of the first drop of rain?
A question worth considering for all of us.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.